Thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity, how to protect your practice in the age of ransomware. We're going to be giving you hopefully some simple tips that you can use to protect your practice and your patient's information. My name is Mark Haskelson. I'm the president of Compliance Group. We are the endorsed solution for HIPAA compliance by AOA Excel. We're also proud sponsors of Think About Your Eyes and visionary level contributors to the AOA PAC. What we do, which is simplify HIPAA compliance, is very important in the intersection point in with what is compliance and cybersecurity. I also sit on the advisory board of an organization called CompTIA. CompTIA is the international certifying body of all IT security technicians in the world. I also sit on their channel advisory board, which means I work with all the different software applications that you potentially work with, like EHRs, big folks like Salesforce, on what are the best ways that we can protect our patients' data. So I'm going to do our best today to step you through a couple things: the basic understanding of security, why ransomware is so prevalent in healthcare, some simple concepts on how to combat it, and then simple steps you can take in your practice tomorrow morning to protect yourself. So a lot of people don't fully understand where the source of attacks originate from. There are four primary. The simplest one is simple theft of a device. Someone stole a phone, a laptop, or a piece of equipment. The second is often comes from what would be mobile applications, what you might interact with on your cell phone or your smart device. The third is more traditional hacking, where someone is intentionally trying to steal or access your information without your permission. And then the last is ransomware. And I'll talk a little bit more about why ransomware is different than other types of cyber attacks and why it's so important that the basic things you can be doing to protect yourself come into play. Now, often when I'm speaking to doctors, they'll say, no one's coming at, this is not a risk I need to worry about. Either I'm not worried about HIPAA violations or I'm not worried about what would be technology issues. I don't have to worry about this. But the reality is you do. So if you take, let's say, the wall of shame, which was where any meaningful breach has been reported in the United States, right now there are 13 open what's considered severe, meaningful breaches just in eye care alone in the last 24 months. So this is happening to eye care. It is happening to your peers, and it can happen to you. So if you were to look at all that data across the country, you'd find that the breaches that occur, the cybersecurity risks, fall into three primary categories. One is the simple loss or theft of a device. Now, to give you a sense of perspective, if you have the data says that 1 in 10 people will lose or have a smart device stolen in a given year, which means if you have more than 10 people in your office, I can guarantee you will have a meaningful breach, and you will have to deal with reporting it and dealing with the repercussions to your business and to your patients. The next big defense I hear from folks is I don't have to worry about this because I've outsourced my security to an IT firm, an MSP, a managed service provider. I have my EHR, etc. All of those things are good steps, but understand that 30% of the major breaches that occur in the United States are actually caused by the vendors themselves. So the people that you hire to protect you actually are the problem. The last, and this is a growing area, it's grown by at least 20 points in the last year or two, and that is 31% of the time it is somebody who is intentionally either hacking or a ransomware attack. So when you think of security, the mistake that often people think of is they get very techie with this. And one of the things I'm going to show you throughout today is some simple basic steps on how you train your people or being HIPAA compliant will give you the majority of your protection against security. So security is not always about fancy technology. It's really about peace of mind. The government did not expect you to be perfect. We want to teach you how to do the basics things to protect yourself and your patient information so you can focus on servicing patients and your business, not worrying about getting hacked. Okay, so the news, there's been lots of different things in the news. A lot of people don't really understand this, but they often there's a misbelief that this is a large business issue. It's not. Ransomware is hitting all different size organizations. Now, why is it so prevalent in healthcare and specifically small and mid-sized businesses like yours in healthcare? Well, the reality is healthcare is the fastest growing sector of the US economy. It is also the most highest vulnerability to cyber risk. 88% of ransomware is perpetrated against a small and mid-sized medical office. Okay, so you are their target population primarily because the value of healthcare information is 10 times what banking information is. Now, the government is after enforcing the basic requirements that you are supposed to be doing under HIPAA compliance to protect this. So you see enforcement up 400%. Unfortunately, even with enforcement up and all the great training that we are trying to do in the industry, 94% of the organizations that have a meaningful breach fail their audits for not having done not taking the appropriate assessments and having the appropriate protections in place. So, if you look at the massive security issues last year, this is information from CompTIA, that international certifying body. They're saying that 76% of the meaningful breaches were caused by something that technology would not have protected you against. Lost devices, phishing attacks, and the phishing attack is, I'll talk about how ransomware gets to you. Unfortunately, if you're counting on your IT department, 26% of the time it was your IT department that failed to have to follow a policy or procedure to protect you. And the number one reason across this is internationally is this mistaken belief that what you have is good enough. It's not hard, it's not necessarily expensive to be secure and to be compliant, but if you need to be doing the basics, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the real cost, although there's been this year over $24 million in fines already, the real issue is of the people who do pay ransomware attacks, unfortunately, 25% of those folks, 1 in 4, are unable to recover their information, even though the hacker gave it back to them. It was so corrupted that it was unable to be used, which brings to downtime. 90% of what is the cost of having a cyber attack is not the fines or the ransomware, okay, or the ransom you pay. It's the effect on your business, downtime, your reputation in your market. There is often class action lawsuits levied against you. So unfortunately, it's not just, it's the overall effect it can have on your business that you really need to be worrying about. So what is ransomware? Unlike hacking in the past or viruses that people got before, this ransomware is designed just to control your data so that you need a key to open it. Okay, they're not looking to steal your information for other purposes. They are looking just to basically prevent you from having access to it so that you pay a fee to them to be given back that key. Okay, and that is different from in the past where people were trying to steal the value of what was your information. Now, so if you look at malware, the most common is something simple email attachments. It looked like a legitimate email. There was something attached to it. You clicked on it, and you've now opened yourself up to a virus. The next area, which is very common, this is a phishing scam. It looks like an absolute legitimate email coming from your bank, your EHR, Federal Express, etc. Unfortunately, the link that was embedded in that email is a fake one. It brings you to a fake address where often they are asking you to click on something, etc. And this is where you get your malware from. You can see this on a regular website. If you just went to a website or you get a solicitation to go to a website, if you don't know it, please be careful with what you click on. So if you do unfortunately get, this was the WannaCry, which was pretty famous last year, they are polite about it. They're just saying, hey, you have a time frame to give us some money or else we delete your files. Okay. Now the problem with it is usually they don't know who you are. They don't care who you are. They could be asking anywhere from $300 to $3,000 or even maybe $10,000. But there's even one which we find particularly disturbing where what they'll say is they'll give you back the data if you are willing to send the virus to 2 of your friends. So how's that for not very nice? Okay. By the way, if you choose to pay, although we would advise you not to pay ransomware, the main causes that we see are spam phishing emails. 46% of the time, it was a email that one of your staff thought it was legitimate. Maybe you got an email from a friend. Hey, here, this really cool. Watch this video. But the next big thing that we find is you can't prevent spamware from coming to you. There are filters you can put in, but there's always clever ways around it. But you can focus on training your employees, and that's one of the second biggest issue is that employees were not trained to avoid these issues. So let's talk a little bit about, over half of the time it is purely human error that caused the major security breach. Okay. If you look at seems a little confusing graph, but what this is telling you is Of people who had ransomware, 93% of them had the state-of-the-art antivirus, anti-malware software in place. 77% of them had email spam filters. And the various different things as you go down the line. But you'll notice if you go all the way to the right, if you would train people who had training in place, rarely got ransomware attacks. It was truly deemed the most effective. Now, the tie-in to compliance here is that's about people and training, and that's what HIPAA compliance is about. And that's why we stress it's so important. So just to kind of make it interesting, I take cybersecurity, compliance, and Game of Thrones and Candy and bring them all together to try to visually help you understand this point. If you're a Game of Thrones fanatic, hopefully there's no spoiler in here for you. The first thing that most people think compliance or security is about the hard walls around your information. Okay, firewalls is the most common thing that you hear people reference. Okay, but the problem is you have the soft gooey inside of, let's say, a Tootsie Pop, which is about compliance, which is about teaching people what they should and should not do. As we said, 76% of the time, it was an issue that was created that had nothing to do with technology. So what that's telling you, and for those of you who have seen Game of Thrones, Jon Snow, ultimately bad things happened to him inside his castle. So what we're trying to help you to do is you must do the external things, you must do the internal compliance and people part to truly have a safe and secure environment. So this is kind of an interesting one. Last year, the Hawaii National Defense Alert went off. Most people claim that it was an accidental, that the person who set it off and it would have been an accidental issue. But this is the guy who was in charge. This is actually his Instagram photo. And one of the things, if you were to take a close look, you'll see that on his monitor, he actually has his password for the warning system. Okay, so this was actually a hack and a very simple one, nothing fancy. Somebody zoomed in on his Instagram account and had a little fun with it. So, it's amazing how easy people make these mistakes. Most people, we can ask 5 questions to get them to betray their passwords. Now, so let's take a few minutes to understand why HIPAA becomes so important in the compliance to cybersecurity. Okay, so what happens is there's 3 rules in HIPAA. The privacy rule is the rules about how you and your staff speak to your patients. The security rules where a lot of people make a mistake and they misunderstand. So what often we hear people saying is, I've hired an external firm to do a security risk assessment, therefore I am secure and compliant. Unfortunately, that's not accurate. If you were just doing that, okay, you were only setting separate of the law, you're only doing 2 out of the mandated annual 6 audits that are required. The others are physical, administrative, and privacy. And the reason why those are so important is it's the administrative ones that help you that drive what is your staff knowing what to do and what not to do. The last is the omnibus rule. The omnibus rule is really what's changed healthcare or compliance and cybersecurity in the recent years. This was done at the end of 2014. It had a 2-year grace period. So you're just beginning to see the enforcement. That's why enforcement up 400%. But the omnibus rule said was really 2 important things. 1, any breach that occurs must be reported to the U.S. government. If it is deemed meaningful, must be done within 60 days. If it is non-meaningful, it can be done at the end of the year. So meaningful is more than 500 people were potentially affected. Okay. Business associate rules, because I pointed out earlier that 30% of breaches are caused by your vendors, the law changed so it said that all vendors that in any way come in contact with PHI need to be HIPAA compliant. So that could be your lawyer and your accountant. That's definitely your EHR. If you're using an external IT or a managed service provider, that is them. Billing firms, clearinghouses, scheduling applications, everyone that you come in contact with, if they're doing work for you, they need to be HIPAA compliant just like you, which brings the requirements that you have if you work with them. Okay, and this all drives back to you being in a more secure environment. Before you share any data with anybody, you need 2 things, a business associate agreement. And the BA agreement just says, we understand we both fall under HIPAA law and that I'm responsible for what I do and you're responsible for what you do. Now, by the way, any vendor who tries to pass that responsibility onto you, okay, for their compliance is breaking the law. So do not accept that if you get a BA agreement like that. The second thing you have to do is what's called a technical due diligence. You can't just say, if they say, yeah, we're all good, you have to ask them to provide some sort of proof that they have proper security protocols in place. Not their HIPAA compliance, but their security protocols. So often what we see visually, if you look at this, if you are just secure, and remember, this goes back to the technology is only part of the solution. If you did, let's say, the security risk assessments that were required every year, if you remediated those basic security efforts, maybe you had a couple of policies and procedures, although impressive, you're still not protecting your practice adequately, nor are you satisfying the law. So for example, it's very common where people say, I did a risk assessment, I have training, and I have policies and procedures, therefore I'm compliant. That is not accurate. To be truly secure and compliant, you must do the 6 required audits every year: administrative, privacy, and security. You must document your gaps and have a written remediation plan. You must have all of the appropriate policies, procedures, and training, not just security. You then must also have each one of your employees individually attest every year that they've understood and they're going to follow it. So for example, if you had a staff meeting, that doesn't mean they've legally agreed to follow it. You want to have a piece of paper that says date, time, person, and policy, procedure, training, specifically that what they've agreed to follow. Business associate management. You must have your BA agreements, and you must have what is your technical due diligence is on file. Lastly, in regards to, and this has to do more with compliance, is if there is an incident, you must investigate, document that, and report it either meaningful in the next 60 days, non-meaningful in the next, at the end of the year. So if you were to look at why I paint this picture of compliance and security, is because it is the reality. If you look at the data coming from the top firms as far as compliance and security goes, 2 things really drive the majority of what is protecting you. Okay, backup and disaster recovery, which I'll talk about in a minute, which are mandated under HIPAA law, and employee training, also mandated under HIPAA law. Same with antivirus and malware software. So if you were just HIPAA compliant, you have reduced your liability by 94%. That's how powerful it is. Now, to give you a couple of real world examples, we have a lost laptop. This was Oregon Health. They were not fined for their lost laptop, whether it was secure or not secure or encrypted. The issue was when they were asked to provide proof of what they had done, they did come back and say they had done a security risk assessment every year going back 6 years, which is great. But the government said, what about the rest of the audits? Because if you had done the administrative and privacy audits, you would have then identified a gap and you would have created the proper policies and procedures, because the gotcha here was, it wasn't whether or not the laptop was encrypted. It was the fact that it was stolen out of a child's hands while the parents were on vacation. And there should, if the organization knew that was a potential, they should have had the proper protections in place. Malware. This was an Alaskan behavioral health group. Malware issue, ransomware attack. They had to report it. They were unable to recover their data. Why they were fined was when they asked, did you do your 6 required audits? They'd only done a security risk assessment, so they had done 2 out of 6. They also were penalized for having they had bought store-bought policies and procedures. So folks, if you're getting something that if you're being told that you can go online and check a couple of boxes and download some policies and procedures, and that's going to make you compliant, you are wasting your money. You might as well do nothing. Okay, they have to adequately reflect the way you run the business. That's critical. Lastly, another thing they got in trouble for was training. Having a staff training is not adequate. You must have, in this case, they had 30% turnover. So because of that, the rate of people that were, it meant a third of their staff was not trained on any given year about what to do and what not to do in regards to security and compliance. Last one is an illustration of the vendor you thought you hired. In this case, an IT firm, a managed service provider that was hired to protect. In this case, it was Catholic Charities. One of their staff was in servicing the client, inadvertently transferred an email over to their personal phone. The phone was then later lost. The information was then accessed. And similar issue here. The fine was not for the lost phone. The fine was, why didn't you have, if you had assessed your risks, you would have had a proper policy and procedure in place to protect yourself. So let's take a little bit common sense basics that you can start taking, to run your practice tomorrow. So we're going to compare your home and cybersecurity. So the first thing you want to do is prevention, right? What can you do to prevent someone from stealing your data or accessing your home, right? So you might lock the door. You might put a sign on the wall saying you have an alarm system. Now, that in the world of security, those are risk assessments, firewalls, and training of your staff to know what to do and what not to do. Now, just because you've prevented it, one of the ways that you can help mitigate the damage done is how quickly you detect something has gone wrong. Okay, so this is the equivalent of having an alarm system on your home. Now, in the case of compliance and cybersecurity, those are monitoring programs. By the way, all mandated under HIPAA law. You're supposed to have proper monitoring and auditing. That's part of the law. You should have virus protection. You should have policies and procedures that clearly outline what is acceptable. Remember, 26% of the time, it was the IT person failed to turn something on that they were supposed to do. The last area is, can you recover it? Because if you can recover it quickly and efficiently, then there's very little damage done. So you might keep a bat by your door. Okay, chase the person away. If you see them running away with your TV, you chase them and tell them to put it down. In the world of technology, that's encryption, storage and backup, and having good disaster recovery plans. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that is. So, compliance and security belong together. If you are compliant, you mitigate the majority, if not all, of your security risks. So, do assess your risks every year as per the law. Make sure your staff is trained. Have policies and procedures that properly reflect the way you run your business. And then the next 2-3 things are about encryption, backup, and having a disaster recovery plan. Okay, if your data is properly encrypted and properly backed up, and you have a plan in place so that if this happens that you can quickly recover the data, then even if you had, whether it was ransomware, you can tell them to go away. They can't use the data they've stolen, and you don't need it because you have it properly backed up. Okay, so encryption and backup, to go into more detail, you need to have regular file and system image backups. By the way, do not rely on just your EHR. You need to back it. What if your EHR loses their data? Okay, they should have a function or a capacity for you to back up the information for yourself. Now, you should practice what's called 3-2-1. 3-2-1, I'll explain in a little bit more detail. But the concept being is multiple ways that you've stored up multiple mediums, and at least one of them must be disconnected from the web. Okay, so that it cannot get corrupted. Now, it's really important that if you have all these things, that you also practice having a disaster recovery plan to recover what happens if these things happen. Depending on how quickly you react, will have a profound effect on the damage that may or may not be done. So 3-2-1 backup, 3 different copies on 2 different formats, at least one offsite. Okay, so that could be your EHR is one backup. You could have Dropbox or iCloud. There's a couple of different backup things, but there should still be one firm or physical storage device. Now you can buy an inexpensive device that will plug into your computers that can back up your entire network, for less than $100. Okay, and most, for example, if you're on a Mac, those are programs that you can automatically set up. Okay, one of them needs to be offsite and disconnected from the internet. Why? So that it doesn't get corrupted. Or if you only kept them at your office and you see, let's say, a hurricane where your office was destroyed, you now don't have a tool to recover your information. So you want one offsite. So what can you do right now? 1, get HIPAA compliant. That is your best form of protection from cybersecurity. A couple simple ones here. Passwords. A lot of people believe that the most secure passwords are a crazy combination of upper and lower cases, etc. That's not accurate. The best thing you can be doing to protect yourself is use a sentence or a phrase. And this is NIST standards. This is the National Institute of Security Standards. Has come up with a phrase, I like blue potato chips. Is the kind of thing that the longer it is, the more secure it is. Bear in mind, a 4-digit password is 10,000 permutations. It means someone could sit there in an hour or 2 and try all 10,000 permutations. Okay, do show your staff what to look for. Train them, understand it. There's great, whether you pay for an organization or just Google some YouTube, you'll find different examples of basic understandings of what to watch out for, of phishing scams, etc. Restrict unnecessary access and user privileges. I cannot tell you how many medical practices I talk to where when we talk to them, everybody from the person who's scheduling on the front end to the doctor all have administrative or full access rights to your EHRs and your computers. That allows malware to sink in and attack your computer. If they were restricted, okay, yes, it's true the person wouldn't be able to download the latest version of iTunes, but they could also not download or access malware. Updates. Okay. When you get that little sign that says, hey, have you updated, and there's a latest update on whether it's an Apple or a PC product, even though they may say it's something minor, what they're really telling you is we had a serious enough breach or incident or virus attack that we've updated our software. So by failing to do your updates is one of the worst things you can do. It's one of the easiest things to do, and many people don't do it. So please make sure you do updates. Now, most of you folks get spam filters come with your email programs. Use them. Don't turn them off. Same thing. Make sure they're updated. Now, ultimately, encryption. Now, why is encryption so important? We talked about encryption and backup, right? And a recovery plan. If you've done that, there you don't have two things. One, you can protect all your information, but two, you also don't have a breach, which means you do not have to report it to the US government because the patient information was not accessed. So if you are interested, on our website, we have a free security and compliance checklist. It is a tool for you. It's a document you can download. You answer the questions yourself. If you feel comfortable once you've answered those questions, you're in great shape. If you are not comfortable, please inquire and we'll gladly answer them for you. We have an Ask the Auditor function on both the AOA website as well as on our website. So I've noticed a couple of folks who post some questions. And there's more questions. Please start asking them. One of the questions is, what to do if your business associate does not sign a BA agreement? If you have a business associate who's not willing to sign a business associate agreement, run fast, okay? It means they know they're not HIPAA compliant. If they ask you to change the language of it to indemnify them, we've had that happen with a couple of players in the eye care industry. Several of the service providers, EHRs, et cetera, have tried to put a language in their documents that basically indemnifies their responsibility of their HIPAA compliance. That is against the law. So please do that. So next, I did my security risk assessment. Why is that not enough? Well, okay, hopefully this whole video is giving you enough information that if all you did was outsource to an EHR and did a security risk assessment once a year, you are not HIPAA compliant. You are highly vulnerable. Another thing is if you have any organization that ever, one thing I'll expand on that. If you ever have an organization call you directly and say that they are an auditor and that you must go through their mandatory audit process, the U.S. government will never do that. Those are deceptive practices in the market. They step you through a couple of questions and then tell you have to pay them to fix things. Okay, that is a scam. It's a phishing scam. So there's a couple of organizations that we know have been predatorily going after optometrists. So if you do get a call like that, hang up on them. Tell them to go away. You can also report it if you like to the AOA, or you can report it to Compliancy Group. We are working with OCR, Office of Civil Rights. These are and some of the state attorney generals to prevent that type of deceptive practice. All right, folks, I hope you found this useful. Any other questions, feel free to email either myself at Compliancy Group or info@Compliancy Group, or come by and ask the auditor function. Thank you again so much to the AOA and AOA Excel for their endorsement. We think that ODs are really special folks, and we're very proud to be working with you guys. Thank you very much. Have a good night.